Hello and welcome back to Good Nightmare, a podcast where I am happy to share with you my greatest review to date, a single star calling me a man-hating woman who's trying to change history. Thank you so much for such kind words. In keeping with today's man-hating theme, apparently, we're going to be looking at a female serial killer who mostly targeted men. In the early 1900s, there were rumours of a woman who had the ability to predict the death date of those around her, almost down to the day. If you're thinking this sounds incredibly unlikely and far-fetched, you're not wrong. Today's case is that of Tillie Kilmek, murderess and an eerie black widow of sorts. Tillie was born in Poland and was moved to Chicago with her parents while still an infant. In spite of living in America all her life, it was noted that she would speak mostly broken English, and from what we can gather from her behaviour, she didn't get on very well with others. There's no record of Tillie herself ever claiming to be psychic. The rumours appeared to have come from neighbours and her, to use the term very loosely, loved ones, who she would cheerily tell that they would soon die. Tillie was a reasonably attractive woman, with a strong jaw and large eyes, and she rarely found herself wanting for company in spite of her eclectic personality. In 1895, she married her first husband, John Mitkevich. They were together for 19 years before he became ill and his health rapidly declined. He died in 1914 of what was documented as heart trouble. Shortly after, she married a man named Joseph Rakowski, who suffered a similar fate. She had an unnamed boyfriend who was said to have slighted her, who also died after a short illness in her company. A pattern had formed. Men did not last long around Tillie. Frank Kupchik became severely ill while living with Tillie. He would be her next and possibly final victim. Here is where the rumours of her psychic abilities may have stemmed from. Though Tillie herself never claimed to have any such gift, she would tell neighbours that Frank did not have long to live, that his passing would happen any day. In the mornings, she would greet Frank by telling him he would be dead soon, and she would sit by his bed knitting herself a mourning cap to be worn when his time came. Possibly even more disturbingly, in Frank's case, she also asked her landlady if it would be possible to store a coffin in the basement of her building, as she would be needing it soon. The coffin would be Frank's, of course. He died of his illness in 1921. It wasn't until her final husband became ill that Tillie was suspected to have interfered with any of the men in her life. Tillie moved quickly. She married a man by the name of Joseph Kilmek in 1921, shortly after Frank's death. Joseph, unsurprisingly, became very ill while living with Tillie. Thankfully, in his case, he was seen to by doctors, and after testing, it was discovered he was suffering arsenic poisoning. Arsenic poisoning gives off a range of debilitating symptoms, and symptoms could have manifested slowly depending on the doses that Tillie used. Her victims would have suffered anything from severe diarrhea, excess saliva, difficulty swallowing, blood in the urine, hair loss, cramps, convulsions, and vomiting, along with damage to the skin, liver, lungs, and kidneys. In the final stages, her victims may have experienced seizures and shock before coma and ultimately death. Upon discovering that Joseph was being deliberately poisoned, Tillie's previous husbands, or victims rather, were exhumed and tested for arsenic poisoning. Naturally, that's exactly what they found. However, Tillie didn't operate alone, or so she said. She claimed that this string of murders began when she told her cousin Nellie that she was tired of her husband Frank. Nellie had recommended divorce initially, but when Tillie said that she would take care of him, Nellie gave her a helping of rat poison. And as most of us true crime buffs know, the main ingredient is arsenic. Along with Tillie, Nellie was also arrested for her involvement in the crimes. After further investigation, it was found that Tillie's husbands weren't necessarily the only victims. Relatives and neighbours of Nellie and Tillie also died after disputes with the women. 2 neighbours had been given lollies by Kilmek and later became gravely ill, and relatives that had eaten with the pair had also become ill. In total, there were 20 suspected victims, with 14 deaths. Tillie's reputation was massive. She wasn't considered a black widow or a singular serial murderer as such. She was considered, quote, a high priestess of a Bluebeard clique. Suspicion spilled over to other wives in the Polish community in Chicago, as it was believed that they had also adopted rat poison as a way to free themselves of their ailing relationships. And though many were arrested, they were later released. Thankfully, Tillie's final husband Joseph survived, though as stated earlier, the consequences of long-term arsenic poisoning are severe. He spent another 3 months in hospital before he was released. In March 1923, Tillie was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Frank. Nellie was imprisoned during her own trial. She was also on trial for murder. Her trial would last a year before she was finally acquitted. Tillie, being the unpleasant or man-hating, perhaps, woman that she was, would also torment Nellie. She would tell her that any moment she was going to be killed, and actually convinced her at one point that Nellie was going to be taken out and hanged the following morning. Strangely, or not so strangely, and as we still see today, there was some focus on Tillie's appearance in the media. Most black widows or female serial murderers were described as reasonably attractive around this time. However, it was reported that Tillie was nothing of the sort. She was described as squat, unattractive, and unkind. Included next is an article that was printed at the time of the trial. By Roy Gibbons, husband seeks to send wife to gallows in Bluebeard murders. Published in the Joplin News Herald, February 26, 1923. Wholesale killer of husbands and cousins, Tillie Kilmek, 1923. Chicago. Dragged back to life from the very edge of the grave, Joseph Kilmek may prove the nemesis that will send his wife Tillie to the gallows, and with her, her cousin, Mrs. Nellie Stunner Kulik. Kilmek is expected to be the state's star witness in the trial here February 27 of the 2 women, charged by police as being the Bluebeard poisoners of 20 persons. Both are held under indictments of first-degree murder. The aged man who may turn their nemesis is Mrs. Kilmek's 4th husband. Mrs. Kulik has had 2 husbands and is mother of 13 children. Assistant State's Attorney W.F. McLaughlin says the trial jury will be asked to impose death penalties, which, if granted, will break an established precedent, for no woman ever has been executed in Illinois. In a local hospital, Kilmek is slowly recovering use of his legs. Physicians say he was paralyzed by the secret introduction of arsenic into his food over a prolonged period. As days pass, he nurses his hatred against the woman who he says plotted his life and vows he will make her pay. "She made me get more insurance," he mutters. "I did not suspect, though the soup and things did taste queer. Then I got sick." Detectives, dipping deep into the sinister pool swirling past the heads of the two women, have exhumed the bodies of 12 whose deaths are laid at the door of the indicted pair. In each body, coroner's chemists say they found enough arsenic to kill a dozen. Attorney McLaughlin promises trial testimony will show that while one of Mrs. Kilmek's husbands lay dying, Mrs. Kilmek often remarked that she believed he would not live long, that a few days before the husband did die, Mrs. Kilmek secured a coffin for a bargain for $30, that after his death she played dance music on a phonograph in the room where the body lay. Tracing Mrs. Kilmek's nuptial ventures, it's been found that in January 1914, Joseph Mitkiewicz, the woman's first husband, died. Within a few weeks of Mitkiewicz's death, Mrs. Kilmek married John. In May, he died. Within a few months also came the end of John Guskowski, a sweetheart. Mrs. Kulik, the other woman, is specifically held on a charge of having poisoned her husband, John Sturmer. Arsenic was found in his stomach, chemists say. In a whirligig of vehement syllables, now in English, now in Polish, now beseeching again, profanely vindictive, both women deny their guilt. They are going to the rope, the prosecution says. "I'll help send them there," the spared fourth husband of Mrs. Kilmek says. "We're going to be freed," the women say. But a jury is yet to have the final word. A list of victims of the alleged poison plot involving Mrs. Tillie Kilmek and her cousin will be offered as evidence. The article also includes a list of their alleged victims. There were few survivors, 2 of which ultimately suffered a paralysis, and another was left with a heart condition. Be sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts, and I'll bring you a fairy tale soon, which will be a little bit dark, but not as horrifying as some of these murder cases that I've been covering. If you have any case recommendations or requests, you can reach me at goodnightmare_s@outlook.com. I'm also on social media, on Facebook at goodnightmarepod, and on Twitter and Instagram at goodnightmare_s. I say this every 2 weeks, but it is such a mouthful, it always trips me up. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing. And as always, sweet dreams.
Hey true crime listeners, check out our podcast, I Said Goddamn. We're a true crime comedy podcast hosted by 2 besties who like to share messed up cases that make you say goddamn. Every Sunday we try to one-up each other's story by sharing a horrific case the other has never heard of. Along the way we splash in some wildly inappropriate jokes and colorful language. Listen every Sunday from any of your favorite podcast directories. Also follow us on Twitter at ISGD Podcast or visit our website isgdpodcast.com.